just checked my mail and I found an ARC waiting for me outside, and I just wanted to take a minute, grab my camera, and show you guys. It is called Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling.
All right, I'm about to start my advanced reader copy of Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling, and I opened it. It's an interesting cover there, and when I opened it, it had a very interesting intro. And this beginning part, I love when books have this like intro where you don't really know anything yet, but by the time you are somewhere in the middle, maybe at the end, this all will make sense. And given the premise of this book, it seems like she's talking to the doppelganger that she has appear in her basement, but we'll see. And here we go. Okay, so I was going to give a quick update. I got through the first part. I don't know how many parts there are for this, but the first part's called The City, and you meet Dr. Tamsin Rivers, and you know that the San Sirocco city is seemingly sinking, and the other things that you're introduced to are she's working experimentally and doing research in the subway system beneath this city, and you don't really know too much about what's going on in terms of what she is gathering data on and working on. But you see her at her house, and she hasn't told anyone that her basement is also sinking just like the city, and she doesn't know what that implicates and doesn't know if it's connected, though how could it not be? And I know I had said this in the very beginning video about wanting to read this book. It very much seems like a Twilight Zone episode to me, and it's very odd so far. So I'm just getting into it, but it just ended that first part. The next part is called The Door, which is going to be, I think, very interesting because a door appears in her basement, and she's noticed that the basement has sunk even more. And I'm sure this is all metaphorical and there are other things going on, but since I'm only one part in, I don't know yet exactly what to make of everything, but it is definitely interesting, so stay tuned.
I just got to chapter 14, and this book is getting good. Getting a little creepy. You have no idea what to think about what is going on, and it's getting good. Hey guys, I'm at my library, and I'm gonna read a little bit of Last to Leave the Room. Currently on chapter 24, page 166, and I'll give you an update once I get done reading a little bit. Just got to chapter 26, which is page 180, and Tamsin, who is the scientist that is the main character, she's getting sucked into this mystery she's trying to solve at her house, and she's taking risks that are making me a little uncomfortable. I know that these risks are probably not going to work out good for her, so the anticipation is building. We'll have to see where this goes.
To the next part, which is the double, where the spitting image of her comes through that door that appears in her basement. And I thought of something else about how this wasn't just Twilight Zone this reminds me of, but the modern day version, which is Black Mirror. And I that show is just really crazy and out there, and happens to be coming back for season 6 this coming week, which is really coincidental. But now the devil has appeared. I just got through the part that is called The Double, and it goes over how Dr. Tamsin Roberts finds a doppelganger that looks just like her. And at the mysterious door in her sinking basement as the city of San Sirocco is sinking. And this part was very, very odd. And I was trying to figure out what was happening, and I got completely sucked in. I ended up reading this part really quickly, and it ended up being a huge part of the book. It was 140 pages, and you learn of this doppelganger, and it made me think, because she names this doppelganger Prime, as in the first one, I guess, is how she described naming the doppelganger Prime. But I thought there's something with the names that are happening in this book, and I looked up Tamsin, and it's of British origin. It's a feminine name that in English it means twin. So obviously the author is playing with names, and her boss, Dr. Tamsin Roberts' boss, is very aggressive and like a minder to her. Like, she's in charge of Tamsin Roberts, and her name is Lachlan, which means warlike. So I know there for sure there's some reasons why she chose the names that she did. But this chapter or part, I don't want to call it a chapter because they're separate chapters, but it's divided into parts. And this one, you really see why it's like a psychological horror, because you see Dr. Tamsin Roberts have a mental breakdown pretty much. And she ends up losing a lot of her memory. And as she's losing herself and going into like a psychological spiral, panic attacks, and she can't assess what reality is, you see Prime is completely with it, is more Dr. Tamsin Roberts than Dr. Tamsin Roberts is. So obviously I think there's some metaphorical things going on, but let's keep going and see what the rest of the book brings. The next part is called Tamsin to the Zero Power, which tested my mathematical skills I haven't had to use in a while. I actually had to look up because I couldn't remember what that meant. And Tamsin, anything to the zero power means 1. So no matter what you put to the zero power, it's just 1. And so I'm thinking that something's going to happen where there is only 1 remaining, maybe. There's not much left, so I'm going to end up going through this book for the rest of the book really quickly. So we shall find.
Hey guys, so we just got to the Airbnb. We rented a little house on the lake. Had to open this lovely umbrella and get in the shade because it was getting hot, and y'all, I get sunburned real easy. I am on the last little bit of this book, and so far it's getting good. I like this better than The Death of Jane Lawrence, which is another book by Caitlin Starling that I read last year. So far this book has picked up a lot. The last third of the book has gone by very fast, and I'm liking it a lot better than I did The Death of Jane Lawrence. on chapter 40. I'm on page 389 of, I'm sorry, 289. Yeah, I'm on page 289 of 310. And I just, like, I've realized this before when I read books, but I wanted to know if you guys feel the same way. When you get to the end of the book and things are happening quicker and the plot's moving faster and you're getting to the ending and the climax and the resolution, do you feel like you read faster? Because I feel like I'm like just skimming these pages, like going faster to try to like figure this out and get to the end and find out what happened.
All right, so I finished the book, and that last part, Tamsin to the Zero Power, was, to me, I was very disoriented and confused at first. Because the way it ended, the chapter, I keep saying chapter when I mean part, the part before where you see the double and everything that transpires once who ends up being called Prime, you see everything escalate to where Tamsin Roberts has a really bad mental breakdown and losing memory and having panic attacks. And Prime ends up kind of taking over for Tamsin Roberts. And I thought that was definitely where it was headed. And maybe the double takes, or Prime takes completely over. But this next part started off where I couldn't tell whose point of view we were seeing at first, and it ends up being Dr. Tamsin Roberts, but I kept questioning that because of how it's written. And Prime now took over being Dr. Tamsin Roberts and treating Dr. Tamsin Roberts as if she was the double. And she names Dr. Tamsin Roberts Nought, Nought. And you don't learn at first why she named her. And as I said in a previous video, I really think the author was saying a lot with the names that she was choosing and how she was having them portrayed with the names that they were given. And I didn't know what was happening. If like, was she going to kill her? Like, what was she going to do with now Dr. Tamsin Roberts being called Not? And chaos ensues. There's so much that happens in this part, even though it's a shorter part of the book in whole. Everything escalates pretty quickly, and if you made it this far and don't want to know the end of the book, then I would skip to further down in the video, but I'll just go ahead and finish saying what the book how it ended up turning out. So Lachlan ends up bursting into Dr. Tamsin Roberts' home and basically rescuing Dr. Tamsin Roberts, but she at first thinks that Dr. Tamsin Roberts is the double, is the doppelganger. She catches Prime doing experiments on her in the basement, and she thinks that Prime is Dr. Tamsin Roberts. And I feel like how many times can I say Dr. Tamsin Roberts? But I'm trying to be as clear as possible because it is really confusing now that there is a double pretending to be someone else. I know it's a little confusing. Anyway, to summarize, Lachlan ends up rescuing Dr. Tamsin Roberts and taking her to her place. It's a penthouse in the city that's sinking. And you kind of find out a little more about what's happening with the city sinking, but not too much more. Everything else has been focused on the book has focused on just the double and what's happening with, that name. So Dr. Tamsin Roberts goes to the city with Lachlan, and they have like a weird week where there was tension with them, and then you finally see that come to fruition, where the sexual tension, I guess, with them ends up breaking, but they don't fully, realize anything because other things start happening. Another door appears in Lachlan's apartment, and another Lachlan appears. And again, spoilers, because I'm just laying it all out there what happens. So Dr. Tamsin Roberts realizes that that is a fake Lachlan. And she doesn't mean to, it's an accident, but she ends up killing the fake, the twin, the doppelganger, whatever you want to call these beings that are coming to fruition. I don't know. I don't want to say born, that they're crossing to this side. I feel like the end was very much something that was up for interpretation to an extent, because once she realizes that the doppelganger Lachlan is murdered or dead, she cleans up everything. She thinks, her theory is, if you kill one of the doubles or doppelgangers, the original also dies. That one has to have the other. And that's her theory. So she's assuming that Lachlan has died. And she thinks even if Lachlan was still alive, she doesn't trust her because she doesn't know how Lachlan would react to what happened. And so she ends up calling Prime to come get her because she's still not fully there. She's still having a lot of mental issues, a lot of psychological damage, and she's still hurt from the experiments that Prime did on her. And she also didn't really trust Prime because she doesn't know what to do or who to trust. And Prime does come, and then crazy things start happening in the city because it's sinking. So buildings are collapsing, and they race out of there. They go back to Dr. Roberts' home, and Lachlan does call on the way, so she knows Lachlan has not died. And so they get back to the house, and that part I was just really confused because at first I thought Dr. Roberts had opened the door and went over to the other side. But how I interpret the end after I read the complete end is that she pretty much put Prime back over to the other side, and she was then alone in this world. And I still don't know if they were trying to say that was a multiverse. It was pretty much, they were pretty much saying that it was happening due to all the experiments that Dr. Tamsin Roberts was doing with nodes underneath the city. So because they dug so deep, they got to a door, and how Prime explains how she came here. She gets to the door and she says to Dr. Roberts, wouldn't you open it too? And pretty much she opened it and came over to this side. They don't go into detail, so you can make that whatever you want. And I feel like it ended on a question mark, because now that Dr. Tamsin Roberts doesn't have a lot of the memory, like that did not come back, she's almost renewed. And now she can choose what she wants to do with her life. And before all this happened, she wasn't looked at as being a nice person. She was very, very evil, pretty much, stepping on anyone to get to the top, not caring about anyone. She lived alone, had no family. She had one cat. And speaking of, the cat does double Penrose. There ends up being two cats. There's like a double cat, but they never fully, I didn't feel fully explain. I feel like there was a part where I was like, are they trying to say that one cat killed the other? I'm not sure. So there were two Penroses, and then it ended up with one. I did feel this was a very fascinating book, a departure of anything I feel I've read. I do feel like it reminded me, I know I said Twilight Zone and Black Mirror, I feel it reminded me a lot of those type of, and a lot of that is like science fiction too. I do feel like it had science fiction elements, even though it's classified as horror. I feel that it reminded me of a lot of those type of books. And even the movie, I thought of it briefly, it wasn't about doppelgangers, but being John Malkovich, it's very out there in terms of premise and what the story is. So I thought that was interesting. I liked that part of it. I ended up giving it 4 stars because I was completely engrossed in this book. It drew me in and I read it very quick. I only read it in 2 days, and that's super quick for me. So it's not that long either, but I feel like typically it takes me a week to read books because of the time I have allotted, and I just couldn't put it down. So I do think it's a really good book, and it's not out till October though, so keep it on your TBR for Goodreads. And I would definitely, if you like very imaginative, crazy stories, this would definitely be for you. The horror elements are more, it's not gore, it's not murder per se. I mean, I don't know, there's one murder in it, but it's more, it leaves you very uneasy, but very mentally uneasy, and puts you on edge. If you like those type of books, this one's definitely one that you should check out. I thought the writing was excellent. I loved Caitlin Starling's writing, by the way. Something that I wanted to add thoughts on in terms of, I guess, metaphorical, I remembered the beginning part of this book, and I had said it in a video that goes over how you are learning something or how a book starts. Sometimes they put like a quote from the book or put a quote in general that relates to the story. And a couple things I didn't talk about are the metaphorical aspects to this book. And at the beginning, there's a conversation, and now that I read it, you pretty much know that it's between the doppelganger and Tamsin, and it talks about being afraid and equating that to, but are you excited? And saying, don't hesitate, it will be harder if you hesitate. And there were a lot of parts that I feel they were making a connection between what happened with this doppelganger coming in through this door, that the door represents change and renewal and making changes in your life and being afraid to make that change. And if you hesitate, you draw out the panic and the confusion when you should just be confident and push forward and go through that door and try not to let your fear pull you back. I feel like there was a lot of metaphorical aspects to making those connections to what they were trying to say with this story. So I like that part of the book. I really like when there's things that you can dig into and make interpretations and see how it mirrors your own life. I wasn't trying to pun with the mirror there. Also, part of the book that I love, that because I started to do it, I was Googling things and looking up meanings of names and doppelganger and stuff like that. But when Tamsin is at Lachlan's apartment and trying to figure out what's happening and who Prime is or what has occurred, she is looking at the meaning of doppelganger and the history of doppelganger, and the name of the story, the name of the book, Last to Leave the Room, is about a myth.
She lingers on a story. The devil teaches black magic to 7 pupils in Salmantia, Spain. The last student to leave each night forfeits their soul. But one clever man argues that when he leaves at sunrise, it will be his shadow that is last to leave the room. The devil agrees and takes his shadow as payment. The man survives but lives out his days marked and miserable.
And that's equating, I guess, in this instance that, who is the shadow? Which one of them is the shadow? So I wanted to make sure that I talked about that aspect because I found that very interesting. And one of the main reasons why I did really like this novel was the metaphorical pieces and kind of like the research part. I like when there's a book that really makes me think, and then I'm looking for answers to what it's making me think about, because I don't necessarily know. I haven't read that much up on doppelgangers and the history and mythology of them, but I did really like that part of the book. But But yep, that's my take on The Last to Leave the Room.